Humans are not meant to work. Unfortunately, I think you have to invent time. You have to make some personal sacrifices. Every action should not be a wasted action, should not be duplicative, should be the best use of a person's time. So you can imagine how that might be annoying. This is sad, right? But when everyone kind of went to bed, I built a whole bunch of apps.
You've been looking at venture for decades, not years, but decades. Superclusters is where we demystify the secrets, stories, and tactics behind the money that moves the venture capital world. My dear listeners, I have a confession to make. Narayan and I never made it out of the green room, the editing room, the small office in the back, the pre-chat. We never made it on stage, and I'm so glad that following my content creators' friends' suggestions, we started recording from our time off stage. And it was so good that Narayan and I just decided to release our technically offline conversation. And so if you didn't catch my drift yet, Narayan Chowdhury is a freaking legend. There's no question about it. He co-founded Franklin Park back in 2003, and over the years has become the de facto expert on venture and buyout in the industry. Prior to Franklin Park, Narayan worked at Hamilton Lane and Public Financial Management. But to say Narayan is a capital allocator, and only a capital allocator, would be a disservice to the life he's lived to date. He's a builder, he's a founder, a self-taught software engineer, a connoisseur of fine hockey jerseys and Philly culinary establishments, a soccer and a hockey player, among much, much more. But you didn't come here to listen to me, you came here to listen to him, where we talk about how broken analysts' onboarding processes are, to never sit alone during lunch, to why data analyses are almost obsolete sometimes as soon as they're published. So without further ado, I'm going to send us back to the green room. Like, my mom and dad are listening. They're not in this world at all. In fact, like, my dad's using Google Translate for half the words I use on this podcast sometimes.
Where was he born?
China.
Okay.
So they moved here. They had me here in the Bay Area. And so I haven't moved too far. I'm still lucky to be like 10 minutes away from home.
Why did they move, and why did they pick the Bay Area?
My dad initially moved because of school, and he picked Chicago because he was going to school in Chicago. And then after spending some time in Chicago, they wanted to build a family. And they're like, we need temperate weather. Chicago is not known for temperate weather. And so out of all the options in which they have, which to be fair wasn't that many, it was like LA, Bay Area, pretty much, as far as I remember.
What sort of vocation is your father?
My dad's an entrepreneur. So he worked in the oil and gas industry, kind of built a couple businesses there. So yeah, I think he switched a couple. The most recent one.
But so he was a civil engineer, mechanical engineer? Or?
If you're talking about majors coming out of school, I think his major was like Parks and Recreation or something like that. It was just like National Parks and Recreation. And then he went to he went to do an MBA and all that. But he's never, like, his parents were astrophysicists and chemists, as my grandparents are. And they were also entrepreneurial in nature. And so he had like the business gene, and I'd say he's more of a salesperson in terms of early career than he was anything else. But I don't think any of his majors in college really correlated with what he ended up doing outside of the MBA.
My father was a civil engineer.
Oh, no way.
Yeah. So he built bridges, steel mills, energy plants.
Do you find any of his career to be influences on how you think about things today?
One thing, it's not specific to his vocation, but over his, call it, almost 40-year career, he was laid off twice and started his own consulting firm at later on. And those moments of instability, he was a single, it was just him and I. And so I think whenever he wasn't working, it was a stressful time, but he always, he was a learner. And I think that notion of you can't have a competency and hope that that'll be it, whether the industry changes or there's some idiosyncratic reason that you're no longer relevant to a particular organization. I think I felt that more so than maybe because it was just him and I. And so this notion of always kind of hacking away, being a little bit unsatisfied or being nimble, I think, but nothing so much as, uh, learning to use a TI or anything like that.
I think your dad and my dad might be similar in that sense, because work always, given that he was an entrepreneur, like work always followed him back from the office.
Yeah.
And so even late at night, like past our bedtimes, I would see like the night in the office, like room in our home on, and he'd be cranking away, typing out emails or making calls, because he was doing a lot of cross-border things as well. And so I don't know, that might, I don't know if that's healthy or unhealthy. My girlfriend tells me it's unhealthy in the sense that now I also work at night.
Yeah, I don't think it's healthy. Well, it goes back to there was a quote recently. I think Bill Gates was talking about how humans are not meant to work, which is, I don't know. I'm a little bit unresolved. I have a 10-year-old daughter, and so I am acutely aware that every moment that she's here and I'm not with her is a moment we'll never get back. And those moments from when she's not just an amoeba, at 1 year old or 1.5 or whatever, those have flown by. And I think I've had a pretty good balance, but there are times, especially when I was traveling a lot to China, I wish I could have those back.
Okay, that's a good reminder. There's also, have you heard of Tim Urban?
Sounds familiar, but
so he's an author for a book called Wait But Why. Also, writes a really great blog by the same name as well. And he had this blog post, I'm forgetting the exact year, but it's like 2015, 2016, 2017, which he called The Tail End, which was a blog post on, instead of counting the time you're alive by years, you count the time you're alive by other things. For example, how many Super Bowls will you see before you die? How many presidents will you see before you die? How many Winter Olympics will you see before you die? And it's just an interesting way of counting the years, or counting the time you're alive. But the very last graph, it's very graphical in nature. It's great. It's like probably a 5-minute read or less. The very last graph in which he has was the time you spend with your parents before you die. And he had surmised if the average human lived till 90 years old, by the time you turned 18, you would have already spent 90% of your time with your parents. And I always think about that a lot. And part of the reason I also stay really close to home, because I want to spend as much time with my parents. I don't have any children, but I imagine I'll have the same kind of like thought process with my children, wanting to spend a lot of time with them as well.
Yeah, that's a bit of a surprising statistic, because I would imagine, I can certainly imagine post college, early career phases not being as connected, but then once you have kids and the grandchildren component, reconnecting. So it's a little bit of a surprising statistic, but
anyways, I think about that a lot. I'll send you the blog post later, and
sure,
if you have time, I'll put a reminder for myself. It's a good one, and it makes you rethink a lot of things, just because we're only on this blue small marble in the universe for so long.
I have found a lot of utility in always being. Now, it causes strife in organizations, but even for those people who I think I annoy, I think they appreciate, which is, I've always been a question everything from a first principles. So even stuff that I've built. So at Franklin Park, I focus on venture, but I've also been a key part of building our tooling, our back end database, from the schema, columns, everything, tables, to front end work, to now looking at AI tools, to all the Excel models that we use, right? So I'll even question the things that I built a year ago. And that's always been a really, I think, I have this mindset that there should be some sort of asymptotic maximum or minimum process speed or throughput or whatever in whatever we're doing, slash every action should not be a wasted action, should not be duplicative, should be the best use of a person's time. And so any tool that we build that is contrary to that and should be reevaluated constantly, I sadly do that all the time. So you can imagine how that might be annoying for a broad organization, especially an organization that when we started, it was only 6 people, has a lot more tolerance for that person. At 30 plus, you start wanting some stability, some lack of daily change, hourly change. I get it. But I can't turn that off really. And I think deep down, I don't think my partners want me to. And I think we've now, after 22 years, we've all sides have grown into this. All right, I know you're gonna, be that person, but I'm going to push back and be the counterweight, and I'm okay. Like, so you arrive at a good sort of equilibrium of that change and constant reinvention. And that's core to who I am and what I do. For example, here's like a question I've been thinking a lot about. We do a lot of I do a lot of the analyst training, right? And so this is unresolved, but here's an example. I think classically, you hire somebody young and you give them a month or whatever early core skills. Quant skills, basic professional stuff. And then you kind of throw them in and you say, here's a work product. Go look at this. Tell me what you think, right? And that's sort of been the approach, I think, at most organizations for a long time. And I think I'm wondering if that creates bad habits. And so my thought is perhaps you don't ask for analysis or opinion for well over a year. And instead, you really request fact derivation, good structuring, good hygiene, good written skills, just quality product versus analysis at all, like zero analysis. And the thinking there is, what do you do when you don't know anything, you haven't met anybody, you have no context? I think the human brain starts inventing rationale. Starts saying, I think maybe, didn't I read somewhere where a 3-year track record is just, they don't have enough experience.
Right.
So I'm gonna write that this team has no experience. And that could be true. It could be. It could be that, they had, they were managing Yuri Milner's portfolio for 15 years. Right. And, there could be some nuance there. And so rather than force the opinion, force the analysis, focus more on throughput. See a lot, do a lot, write a lot, and really get that craft of speed and information flow cranked way higher than spending time analyzing. So it's things like that. And so I'm sort of infatuated by process reinvention. And right now, with what large language models are providing, the opportunity to reinvent is like I've never seen. It's amazing. It's really so good. I'm just getting back for spring break, and I mean, this is sad, right? But when everyone kind of went to bed, I built a whole bunch of apps for our
What
for
did you
our
build? Do you remember?
yeah. I built a tool that will take GP Excel sheets and help ingest it with semantic mapping, turn it into a data set that's appropriate for staging into our track record model. So it
Interesting.
saves like hours of data transformation for our track record models, right?
And all of this was in a night? Like three
This was
tools in a night?
like well, and some of it preceded my trip, but it was,
Okay.
call it like a month's worth of nights.
I would love to be a fly on the wall late at night in your home, just like seeing how you build some of these things.
It's with Cursor and the tools that are at
Yeah.
people's disposal right now. It's unbelievable. It's really unbelievable. I would not call myself an engineer at all.
Right. Now your dad was a civil engineer.
Well, a software engineer.
True. Okay. Two different disciplines.
Yeah.
How did you build products? Because you were actually, on that note, like, you were a founder prior, and you built tons of products prior to even, like, what we know today. How did you build products before AI?
Well, I did when my daughter was born. There was, remember I was talking about the amoeba stage.
Yeah.
So my wife was doing most of the hard work, and when Liv was asleep, I thought, I'll have a window here to learn software development. And so a person who is now a friend of mine, he actually lives in Brazil. He taught me Android front end, JavaScript. And so that was the download Eclipse and start building mobile apps for Android. So that was the very, very first thing.
Wow. And I believe you there was like what? Gymify, Twirl, Eventcast.
Oh, God, yeah.
I might be missing a couple, to be completely honest.
There was one thing that predated all of them that I didn't build, but I had contracted. And this was early. This was maybe 2009, I want to say. Early in the iPhone era, where we had licensed voice recognition software out of Carnegie Mellon. Actually, a lot of those people ended up kind of being in venture and tech. And the product we had built was it was Say Cheese. So you open up the camera app and you say cheese. You just speak it, and that takes the picture. So it was very, very, now it's part of the OS. It's no longer a relevant standalone product. But this was for situations where you didn't want to kind of disturb the image, the handpiece at all. And it was very simple. I think it cost maybe $5,000 with a local developer.
And was $5,000, I actually don't know, but like, was $5,000 industry standard around 2009 or? No,
this was somebody I played soccer with who was kind of also curious about how to, seems fun. Yeah. And it was really just it wasn't ultra, there wasn't a big UI. There wasn't many pages. So it was fairly straightforward build. Okay. But yeah, so that was the first. And then Eventcast was my learning project.
Oh, so that was the one where your friend from Brazil kind of taught you the Android, gotcha.
And that was pretty good, actually.
I don't even know if this is the friend that you're talking about, the one in Brazil. But I'm curious, how did you meet, I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, Franz Jr.?
Franze
Jr.
Yeah.
Is this the same person, or are we talking about a different person?
No, that's him. Yeah.
Okay. How did you meet him?
So when I this is you know what, I'll one more technical thing. And
I'll
Alan
take it.
Patricof says this sort of thing, which is like, don't be shy. Don't. He had a quote that was relayed to me by Adele Oliva, who would work for him at Apex. Alan is one of the real like godfathers of venture and private equity, and his quote was never sit alone at lunch, and it was a way of saying, yeah, you could just kind of sit at your desk and relax by yourself, right? But take that opportunity to go learn something, meet somebody, extend yourself. And so I've also never kind of been shy about picking up the phone and calling people who I probably have no right to speak with or might be sort of out of my network or even 2 degrees out. And so I first went onto a tutoring website for kids.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of those, I liked it because it was a bit open-ended of a marketplace, meaning you didn't have to put in a bunch of perfect information about yourself and then it would match you perfectly because I was an oddball, right? I was 30 something, had no background. I wasn't studying for a test. Like I was an outlier if it was a highly structured process. But it surfaced a bunch of people who would be willing to teach mobile development. And Leonardo was the first person I connected with. He happened to be a grad student at Penn.
Okay.
And he said, hey, interesting. I don't actually have time. Like your use case is not what I want to do, but I have a friend in Brazil. He grew up in Brazil that would want to do that, I think. Let me put you in touch with Franze. So and it's sort of like that happens a lot, I'd say, in my life, where it's like the first thing you do is awkward and not the end goal or the thing that gets the job done, but persistence on mining that tree often bears fruit. And this is one of those situations. And so that's how I met Franze.
I love it. What a beautiful story. And since then, you've gone on to build several things with him and several things yourself as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
If I were to do like a rewind.
Okay. I have a good outbound story. So early on, call it 05, 06, I had gotten to meet Josh Koppelman, who's first round. He's here in this Philly area. There's two kind of veins here. So one, we were doing work, or we were just getting to know this venture firm called Vimac, VIMAC. They're not around. Boston based. It was early in our kind of venture scouting work, and they had invested in a company called Infonautics, which a number of MVP had. Anyway, it was through diligencing Vimac that I met Josh. That conversation just went really great. He was at the time, I think, investing with Comcast dollars through something called Midas. And he became a little bit of a sounding board, somebody I got a sense of the zeitgeist of what was happening in internet and mobile and cloud very early on. Excuse me. And gradually, I really, our firm kind of said, wow, this is very different than the last generation of venture that we had been looking at. And that really surfaced all of the first generation folks, whether it was Felice or Aiden at the time, it was Aiden,
yes,
Manu Kumar, IA, Jeff Clavier, Freestyle folks, Foundry, even USV to some degree. And then one of them was, I kept seeing, Mike Maples, but I didn't know how to get in touch with Mike Maples. He at the time he just had a website that just said Maples, I think, on it. But I happened to I don't know why, but I opened up the source code on it, and at the very bottom it had his email in the notes.
Interesting.
And so I reached out to him through that email. Ended up meeting him in Palo Alto at a diner, and he just had the purpose of what he wanted to build, his deep emotional resonance with founders. It was really different. It was really, really different. And that had such a profound effect on, okay, this is not traditional finance. This is not what a PE buyout investor looks like at all. So the mindset I had to have thinking about venture managers, founders, the journey that founders, their employees, investors in those founders have is not the rest of PE land, is not diligence in buyout world. That was a phenomenal experience. And it was because, you're hunting around and searching in odd places.
I've never heard someone say they pulled up the source code for a website to find an email and then cold email. That is beautiful and magical in so many ways.
Yeah, that was really good.
Out of curiosity, for when you were talking to Mike Maples and you were learning about, hey, there's this reframing that I need to have between buyout versus venture, what were the steps you took after that conversation to, I guess, recalibrate the framework you had for venture?
And we're doing this, I'd say now again. It was a back to basics thinking about, okay, well, that means that the brand stability, the brand value perhaps was deteriorating, and founders perhaps wanted a different product. Is that true? We better start getting closer to founders and understanding what their needs are, how they want to fundraise, what sort of rounds they care about, how is signaling changed. I don't care if I get a first capital raise from Kleiner at the time, or Sequoia. Maybe I care about iterating quickly, not diluting myself as much, creating some optionality so that if we do have a strategic exit at 75, like the Invite Media folks, that's still going to be a phenomenal outcome for ourselves and for our investors. And so if the fundamental calculus was changing on founder demand for types of dollars, outcome demands, we had just gone through kind of the telecom and semiconductor bust-ish. A lot of those investments just didn't yield fruit. Right. And so if the chessboard was changing, what was going to be in demand? And so started really looking at companies that were in the press, and people were talking about things that were growing, building our founder network to ask them, what are exciting companies? Who's outreaching to you? Who's doing the right things, not just kind of sitting around? Who's attending the interesting conferences and demo days and doing the hard work to get in front of you? And that informed a lot of our call it 07 to 11, 12 thesis. And then kind of after that, that's when you saw the second generation giant influx of micro VC. And then another wave after that in kind of 18 and then perhaps the overextension. But it
at each, like, yeah. I'm curious for you, because you mentioned like there's a difference between VC and buyout, right? And you once wrote in an article that the word top, and I'm using air quotes here for everyone listening on the podcast, right, has had so much grief in the investment world, and you'll find that quote unquote top lists are everywhere. That top should be a measurement on a team's ability to generate returns in the future as opposed to size. And this may seem like a really rookie question, probably the rookie question of the century. But how does one underwrite a team's ability to generate returns in the future, and how does that differ between venture and buyout?
For us, we're still in venture. We're still trying to answer the question of how do you interact with and win the best teams. And especially as certain parts of the stack become more commoditized, it's going to even be a broader execution problem. There's going to be novel IP, certainly, that's going to win in some cases. But those teams that can out execute and out persevere their peers. And so how does a firm we can talk about the details of that in a bit, but looking backwards on track records in venture, I think, can be a very scary decision. Why? Well, it could be that the prior funds, they were a completely passive throw in on a cap table where they were following some social cues. It was in a ZERP environment, and perhaps they got lucky. And whether they were part of a giant outcome, it's sort of meaningless for the future because neither the syndicate nor the founders really know who that person ever was, right? And so the go forward benefit of that investment decision is zero. Versus, we were the trusted investor for that founder and his or her one or two concentric rings that's our network. That's where we're going to mine from going forward. That there's a lot of value to be gotten out of that, right? So not all prior track records are the same, and we have to go back to why going forward our founder is going to seek out or accept those dollars. And so now I guess I'll go in a little bit of the underwriting more recently. I think we've broadly said we're going to be kind of in two areas. One are groups that have really profound alumni networks, but have stayed disciplined. So a Union Square or a First Round would sort of be canonical examples here. They haven't grown well beyond their demand or taken advantage of all the demand for their funds. Yet they've supported hundreds now founders. And again, not just thrown money in, but those founders are, tightly bonded with First Round or Union Square or like an ENIAC or a NextView or a Costa Noa, or just throwing out a bunch of these where, the principals are still active. They have 10 to 15 years of experience, have a lot of scar tissue, lots of board experience, lots of playbooks experienced and written, and in an uncertain future, which is where I'm feeling like we are. Those sorts of people, we're hoping will be adaptable and see through these very opaque paths.
Like, as advice for people who have, like, let's say, I wouldn't say pigeonholed themselves, but have focused a large part of their career on one type of skill, one type of industry, what is your recommendation or the activation, or how do you give them the activation energy to experiment with other things?
Unfortunately, I think you have to invent time. You have to make some personal sacrifices on leisure, essentially, when you have that capacity, or invent some capacity and be curious about a thing. I'm reminded just now of a solo VC who had he was trained in and professionally worked as a chip designer, and for whatever reason, a decade or more into his career, became interested in drug discovery, and self-taught, was started angel investing in some, started building a network of people who go out and look at PIs, would go to events where there were PIs. And I don't know if he's going to be a great drug discovery and drug investor, right?
Right.
But he's reinvented himself through years and years of people and information flow when he had time.
There's this idea I was recently listening to a podcast, and they called it, you need to give space to have productive boredom. And I really like that term. I don't know if that means or sounds like anything to you, but it sounds like leaving time, especially as you're exploring.
Yeah, I think it's the same thing, you know?
Yeah.
I don't know if I was bored. I was definitely frustrated at times.
Emotions might be different.
Yeah.
To circle back a little bit, you mentioned something earlier before you talked about the hyper specialists that you guys look at. You like people with, who are disciplined and deeply connected to a network.
Yeah.
I see one thing I struggle with a lot when I'm looking at fund managers is, and I assume I'm not the only one in this, is that you look at every deck, and every deck tells you that they're connected to so many people. They're in this alumni network, they're in this mafia, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
How do you suss out if someone is actually connected to a network? Obviously, there are references like, do you know this person, right? But is there a deeper layer in which we can go in?
I would say we're very fortunate. This was so hard early on in our careers. It's still hard, but it's easier after 22 years to have a network of founders and co-investors where you can get some good tactical, not just, I like them, I'll invest with them, I'll look at stuff that they send me, but how do they behave in this? You start having a graph in your head of deals, financing situations, key milestones and companies. Like I kind of have a story about when this company tried to raise a B and how tumultuous it was and why. And so you have this graph that you can say, let me ping this node, and this node, and get some high quality information about a person. It doesn't always work out, but we have now collectively 30 of us. We just have a lot of ability to suss that out. Not 100% and not always 100% reliable. And you have to remember that some people have access to grind, and a reference is one data point, and even that can sometimes be unreliable, but it is leveraging that network. And then, you also want to take a look at these companies. I think there's a trend happening right now where I think Palantir kind of made it fashionable of faking it until you make it on terms of quoting operating metrics. And so there's a mini trend of, oh yeah, we're at X run rate.
Yeah.
Which sounds impressive. But if you were to actually do some checking, that is really 10 proof of concept potential contracted revenues over 10 years. If this happens, if we actually graduate into that contract over this much time, yeah, that's the number. So it's not a lie. They didn't just doctor a bank account with Photoshop, but it's also not a realistic, conservative, apples to apple of what we'd say is say hypergrowth.
I agree.
Right. So that's an extra burden. I would say right now is really not trusting the metrics we're hearing from either founders or VCs off the bat.
Oh yeah, I agree. And I don't think most people are trying to intentionally lie or mislead you. It's a function of a lot of these emerging managers don't have classical training. So I kid you not, there's some managers I talk to and they don't know the difference between run rate versus ARR, which is slightly worrisome, but nevertheless, they are different things. And I'll add a note to that, especially with this. I mentioned we weren't going to talk about too many things that were ephemeral in nature, but I think this might be a function of what is to come as well, which is this idea of annual curiosity revenue with AI. I didn't come up with that term. I saw Samir Kaji post about this publicly, but I also have had private discussions with LPs about this idea of the annual curiosity revenue, where every like VP of AI, chief AI officer has this large discretionary budget where they can just spend and explore things because
You
internally, I agree. And I've also heard this from others where, the folks at Google, Larry has internally said at Google a couple times where, if we don't win this AI race, like I might as well go bankrupt. Like I'd rather go bankrupt.
I've heard that quote. I'd rather go bankrupt than lose this AI race.
Exactly. There we go. Thank you for
something like that.
Something like that. Not word for word, but we've heard several of this. And so people are spending so much. And you have all these companies, which are insane to think about, that go from 0 to like 5 million in revenue in less than a year. And normally those would be really good metrics. That means you're onto something.
That's
when
right.
Like 20%, 25% of your portfolio looks like that, if not more, you do call into question a couple things. And then you start looking to, okay, let's pause on that number. And let's actually look at like net revenue retention. But you can't actually see that until you're at least a year into a relationship with a customer. So anyways.
But I'm sure this is, we're not saying anything that VCs aren't seeing. And so I'm sure they have secondary and tertiary metrics around product iteration cycles and usage metrics and even I would say probably some efficiency metrics on how they're prompting, inferring, and repackaging. They can probably if they're doing they probably hopefully see the landscape of similar products and similar teams and say, listen, this product and this team we've now observed over a couple months, and this one is spiking for this reason. Or maybe less charitably, we already have 20 million in. We better support this one with another 30, and we'll just will it into existence.
And there are examples of where venture capitalists as well as founders have willed things into existence, but those are in rarefied air, and it's hard to build a strategy around that.
Yeah, it's scary.
I'm curious for you. We have so many folks coming out of the woodwork these days, and PitchBook quotes like a couple thousand that's coming out every single year, and I'm sure that we're all seeing different amounts. But you've been looking at venture for decades, not years, but decades. I'm curious for you, how has the phenotype of a successful GP changed across all this time?
Hard to say, partly because sometimes it's a particular Markov path that is independent of some other factors that you might want to point to. What I mean by that is person A and B are, if you were to not look at their past work at which and you could somehow extract out how their past work has affected who they are now, basically like some measure of raw EQ, IQ, whatever that, and judgment, they're the same. Okay. Yet person A, started investing at a time when, and we've seen this in a couple cycles, they're given a checkbook. There are times in venture where you're 20 something, you're not allowed to do anything. You're allowed to go to meetings and support the senior partner, and that's it. Then there are times where they're like, get money out, go invest, go, here's a checkbook. And so that is out of the person's control, right? But that can be super determinative of their future career. And so let's say you had a checkbook and you were investing at a point where telecom or chips or consumer apps were really, really popular, and your friend at XYZ school was working on Pinterest, and so you were right place, right time. You made a good decision because of all of these confounding factors, and now you're known as the Pinterest person or the XYZ person, right? And so now you're that chain is there's a positive feedback cycle, right, in their careers, and that's hard to disentangle from. Are they good or are they bad because they were an entrepreneur or a former entrepreneur, or because they were a lawyer or they were this or that? We're in this super spiky outlier business, so it's really hard to say pigeonhole people, I would say.
Right.
And to a point you were making earlier, it's even doubly hard because, as you were saying, all of these decks, they're all seemingly credible. There's one person I'm thinking about in the Valley who has been an advisor on, 40 funds. His picture just keeps coming up over and over and over. Now, there's no way that he's actually, I think he's actually started his own fund now. But for a while, he was a venture partner, venture advisor on so many funds, right? What does that mean? That can't possibly be value additive to any of them, right? Or a similar anecdote. It used to be when you would fund a team that was, the head of Meta's this, the head of Google's that, the head of Databricks this product or that product. That was incredible signal, right? Yeah. Now every team has spent a few years at big tech, has, those bona fides, has gone through some interesting engineering path. And so the way things change from signal to noise, I think, is really hard to suss out right now. I would imagine for VCs and for us. So I think that's part of the reason why I go back to we have been overweighting people who've seen it, done it, have scars, and can leverage a decade plus 2 decades of anecdotes and heuristics to make calls. Now, whether or not, so that's a nice story, but they're often confronted with the issue of, but there are other firms that exist that have other competitive missions to you, meaning, okay, I have a great relationship with this founder. I'm thinking of a very live example now. Founder made a great exit in the media tech business, really notable company in the New York ecosystem. Had the founder, the VCs that backed him for that company, very close with, had been references, are still references, no issue, right? He starts a cybersecurity company, launches with a $40-50 million fundraise. Guess who's not doing that deal? All of those disciplined, smaller funds, right? He's raising, because of his profile, from a different category of investors where the relationship doesn't matter, right? So there's a counterfactual to everything you want to hope you believe will work.
I imagine it's a better proof point for these smaller disciplined funds to invest in said successful founder. Again, if if there was something there and there was more discipline there. But oftentimes, like when you're raising, let's be honest, a 40, 50, $100 billion round, um, it, you stretch the truth a little bit. And the question is like, how do you even return a fund if you're putting in hundreds of millions into a bet where the ultimate upside may just be an acquisition, much less like going public?
Yeah.
So,
But the strategy, it worked for a little bit. There was when, and I think interestingly, when I hate to call out any firms, I won't, but when a certain
Lori's going to come after you if you call out any firms.
I know. If a certain high velocity growth fund, was the only one employing that capital as a weapon strategy, I think it worked for a time. And I believe that this fund had a many $100 million fund that was a big multiple fund.
Yeah.
The problem is the barriers to entry for that strategy are pretty low. And you get killed death by 1,000 cuts when you're not the only one trying to flood the market with capital and out competing on price. And so perhaps when there are, I'm just making up a number, 6 outlier outcomes in a year, right? And you, by being present, aggressive, and with limited competition, you owned 4 of them. You were able to get into 4 of them. Mm-hmm. That probably still works out. Now, however, if there are 40, 50 competitors, some of whom, and you're really competing, you're a price taker at that segment. And so you go from a, 2/3 hit rate to 0 or 1/6 maybe. It's a very hard strategy to execute, right? So that's the other thing I would say when we do a bunch of data analysis. And I was talking to somebody, he's a lecturer at USC about this. Just when you think that you have some insight from the data, you realize, that was a regime change. All of that data was from a time period that is totally irrelevant to what's happening. And so this is one of the big issues of doing a bunch of data work on venture is insights from some periods really don't mean anything or are not translatable to the present time. It's really frustrating. So I think we go back to people reputations, experience, some of the motherhood and apple pie things that we're fortunate, again, that after 22 years, you just have a big graph and you want to make sure you leverage not just my graph, but Melanie, Ryan, Michael's, Brad's, at our shop's graph as well, right? So that team approach to hunting down information, that's, I think, our biggest advantage.
I'd love to come into the back half and just have these like non-venture like questions so that people can get to know you as a person. And so if you'll humor me here, as an enthusiast who not only spectates the frigid sport of ice hockey, but also is an active contributor to the Wissahickon Skating Club, where after you left the soccer field, I believe in 2010, what do most people underappreciate about the sport?
Well, I think the thing that I didn't appreciate that I love and so thankful for is that it's low impact. Which
really?
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. At least it doesn't sound like it makes sense to me.
Well, when you're playing ice hockey as an old person, nobody's trying to make contact. You make contact by accident. So there's not a person to person physicality. The other part of physicality in any sport is you with the surface, right? So
right.
And that's where it's incredibly low impact. So I play hockey with guys in their 70s, which I couldn't say I could do basketball or soccer or, a much more aggressive ball sport into my 70s.
Okay.
But you can with hockey. So it's never too late. It's something that you can really do into advanced ages. And it's a great mental and physical workout. So I'm so thankful that I picked it up as a lifestyle later on in life. I didn't play. I skated a little bit as a kid, but really hadn't played until 30 something. So
now you're 15 years in.
Yeah, and so I'm highly recommend it. The other fascinating thing about hockey is, probably unlike other sports, you can't do anything on day one. Like that, you decide to play ice hockey, you're completely useless. You can't do anything, right? If you've never played basketball, you could maybe catch the ball and hand it off, or throw it up, or do something. Ice, you can't stand. You know, you're totally useless on day one. So you have to do some basic fundamentals to even be mildly functional, which is a nice. It's a barrier for I think a lot of people, but it kind of, once you get over it, you're sort of committed. Anyway, hockey has been amazing. I love it. I love playing it. I'm actually going this weekend. We're going to a 3-day camp for adults.
I don't think I ever mentioned to you, but ice hockey is my worst nemesis. But I do marvel at so many people who can play ice hockey. And the reason for that is because my ankles are way too flexible, because I did swimming in a prior career, and I did these odd stretches for breaststroke in particular, which is like really bad on your ankles, by the way. But all that to say, like, I can't stand up on skates at all, which I'd always wanted to, but unfortunately,
like
I kind of ruined my ankles.
We got to get you out, get some skates on. Maybe you have the wrong skates.
I'll come out to Philly, and then maybe I'll play with all of you, no contact, and I'll just try to get myself around. I've tried.
I'd love it. I'd say rental skates might exacerbate the problem.
Okay, so you need good skates.
I think
or like
so.
Your own.
Good stability is pretty key on skating. So let me think about that.
I'll text you on this. And if you have any recommendations, I'll text you on this, and you let me know what skates I should get, and I'll buy a pair. And hopefully that solves something. But I've always used rental skates, in all fairness.
Yeah, those are tough. Those are tough.
Well, all that to say, Narayan, thank you so much for this. This, as I mentioned earlier, we've never left the pre-chat, but that makes it even more beautiful, the conversation even more fascinating to me, because we didn't even go through all the checklists. And I think I only asked you one out of all the questions I had for you, maybe two at most. So anyways, I need to have you back on. Narayan, you were absolutely amazing.
I had a lot of fun.
Amazing.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, David.
That's what I love to hear, but do also give me honest feedback on the flip side as well. All that to say, Superclusters fans, we'll see you soon. Hey Superclusters fans, David from Post here. If you enjoyed today's episode, all I ask are 3 small things. 1, there's a little red subscribe button down in YouTube, and a follow button if you're on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. If and only if you enjoyed today's episode, that's the button to click, and you'll get many more presents, insights, and brilliant minds straight through the internet, just like this one very, very soon. 2, let me know down in the comments what your favorite Narayan mic drop moment for this episode was. And 3, it'd mean so much to me if you could share it with one other friend you think could gain a lot from listening to today's Cosmos of Insights. Also, let me know if there's anything I should have done, could have done, asked down in the comments, and if there's enough interest, we'll bring back today's guest for an even spicier part 2. I made a promise to myself to record 100 episodes of Superclusters, so every comment, question, review makes this experience a lot more meaningful and helpful for you, and making investing in venture a little less scary and a lot more friendly. And lastly, I want to share a quick disclaimer. So the views expressed in this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only, and are solely the views of myself and the guest alone. They are not representative of any organization we're a part of. None of the views expressed here constitute legal, investment, business, or tax advice. Any allusions or references to funds or companies are for illustrative purposes only and should not be relied upon as investment recommendations. Consult a professional investment advisor prior to making any investment decisions. And that is all from me. See you on the next.